Hi guys, it's Christy again, and today, after a pretty long hiatus, I'm going to be painting a new Napoleonic figure for you. And I have got this Russian Grenadier from Foundry that I'm going to be showing you. And now this guy is sort of a later period Grenadier. His uniform is one that they wore around, I don't know, 1811 or thereabouts, I believe. So, you know, the earlier versions have differences like bigger plume and the greatcoat looks different, some stuff like that. But hopefully, you know, regardless of what period you're doing, you'll find it to be sort of generally useful. And of course, Foundry makes quite a lot of variants on this figure, but the one that I have is wearing a greatcoat, so that's what I'm going to be showing you today. And I know that has some disadvantages. You know, if you want to see what the classic sort of Russian Grenadier uniform looks like, you're not really going to see that with the greatcoat on. But the advantage, I think, is that the greatcoated figures, and this kind of applies for all Napoleonic armies, are a lot faster and easier to paint generally. And you know, even if you're putting together a comparatively small Napoleonic army, you're still going to probably have to paint hundreds of figures. So I know a lot of people tend to put quite a few great-coated figures into their armies just for that reason, because they're just a lot more expedient. So hopefully, you know, if you're looking to make a Russian army in a hurry and you need a unit that's a little bit easier, this will be a really almost more useful tutorial, I think, which you can hopefully appreciate.
So as usual, let me start off with all the colors you're going to need to paint this miniature. Of course, as always, this does not include the colors that you might use for the face, hands, or in this case, mustache and hair. The pants color generally worn by the Russian Grenadiers was white. You will see some green variants, but most of the time it would be white. So I'm going to be base coating those now with Vallejo Sky Gray. My first highlight on the pants now is going to be a mixture, about 50-50 I'd say, of white and the sky gray, just to get kind of a slightly lighter gray shade. The pants are not so hard to paint here just because there's not a whole lot of them showing, as you can see, and you know that saves a lot of time since white is generally a fairly time-consuming color. I'm now going to go ahead and finish up the pants by grabbing just some pure white, which I've thinned down so it's got a nice runny consistency, and I'm going to start layering it, just building it up gradually to get a good, nice range of highlights and get some really bright whites on areas like the knees, and you know, the usual sort of high sort of tops of wrinkles and folds, and leave the other areas sort of darker and kind of transitioning from the bright white down to a more subtle tone just by virtue of building up the layers here. Now the Russian greatcoat was sort of just an undyed brownish sort of gray wool color. So the base I've got here is a mixture of Vallejo khaki with just a hint of chocolate brown in it for the sort of first coat, just to make it slightly darker as we start off. And then we'll be just adding increasingly sort of light layers on top of this. So it's not going to end up looking nearly as dark when we're done as this sort of color that you see now. My first highlight on the jacket is then going to be just pure khaki. You're not going to see a whole lot of real difference here in terms of the tone. It's going to be real subtle, but I really like to make sure my first highlight is fairly subtle compared to the base, because then you've got sort of a nice, sort of easy transition sort of to start out with. And it is true that you can get a little bit more contrast if you just kind of build the khaki up a little bit and layer it a few times before you kind of move on to the next layer. lightening the Greatcoat is not very complicated, and basically from now on all I'm going to do is take some Vallejo deck tan and sort of mix it sort of progressively into my khaki and just keep building up layers of that over the jacket until I get it as light as I want. This is my first level of sort of the khaki deck tan mix, and I haven't put too much deck tan in yet. As you can see, I'm keeping it pretty subtle, and as I kind of get higher and higher in the highlights, I'll be making sort of that contrast starker, but then by that point, you know, it'll be easier to really blend the levels together. And again, here it is with just a little bit more deck tan in the mix, just sort of building it up very slowly on the wrinkles and creases. And then you've got those nice sort of pleats kind of in the back of this particular model of Greatcoat that are going to be, you know, fun to paint. You're really going to want to make sure you sort of emphasize the top of those whenever you get a chance with whatever bright highlight color you're using. And still here, I'm keeping my mix of the deck tan and khaki fairly subtle and building it up really slowly and applying just sort of multiple layers of each shade for even more sort of nuance. This color that I'm using on the Russian Greatcoat works really well, actually, if you're doing French Greatcoats as well, and I've used a very similar combination to do those. So if you're not into Russians, but you do want to do French Napoleonics, you should hopefully be able to get something useful out of this. And in fact, probably some other armies may have had a similar color as well. The Greatcoats at that time were all very much like each other. In terms of the French Greatcoats, there were other colors you see too, like more of a real gray color, a blue color. But ideally, within one unit, you want to kind of mix all those different colors up and have a little bit of variety, just because it'll make your unit look better, and it'll also kind of help reduce a little bit of monotony when you're painting, because, you know, when you got 24 guys or whatever you've got to put on a base, just having some different colors and, you know, some variation in dress is really going to help it just not be quite so mind-numbing to paint. And my final layer is sort of an edge highlight in a sense, though I am going to be blending it out. And this has really a very large percentage of deck tan in it. It's not quite pure deck tan, but it's quite a bit, so it's really intense. And so I like to apply this very thinly and lightly at first. And I've also switched over here to my number 0 brush. I find that when you get to sort of the end of the highlighting process, and you want really thin, delicate, sort of sharp creases and things like that, and you want to emphasize those, and you want really tidy, neat edges and a good, clean, finished look, it's so much easier to work with a smaller brush. Those sort of lower layers where we're being a little bit more general and covering larger areas, it is easier to do with the larger brush. But here, I think the little brush really just pays off. It's a lot faster. It'll just give you nicer, more precise results. But it is not as good for blending out large areas. So just keep that in mind. If you want, you can even go in with some pure deck tan when you're done. If you want to really put a really light emphasis on a few seams or things like that. But if you do that, be really, really careful with that color. Keep it thin, keep it light, because that's really easy to have it just too bright, even in contrast to the rest of the coat, and you may find it sort of difficult to blend everything together as much as you'd like. Now there's different ways you can go about kind of saving time when you're painting a model. One way is to try to paint everything of the same color at the same time. And I try to do that as much as possible. But there are drawbacks to that method, because sometimes if the sort of the things you need to paint in the same color are in really different sort of layers of the sculpt, it's going to interfere with painting other areas later. And that's very much what's going on here, because I already painted the pants white, but I knew there were going to be other white elements on this uniform, but I did not want to do them at the same time for exactly that reason. I knew it would be more difficult to paint other things later. But now that I've got that Greatcoat finished, this is a perfect time for me to paint sort of most of the strapping and belts on this model, which should be white. So I'm doing that now, and I'm using the number 0 brush again, just because I want them to be, you know, delicate and clean. And, you know, it's just easier to get into all the crevices. I'm just base coating these areas again with sky gray like I did on the pants. And then again, I'm going to do an intermediate highlight on the straps with a mixture that's about 50-50 sky gray and white. The crucial thing here is if you've got any sort of divisions or sort of breaks between different white areas, make sure you use this color to really sort of pick out those differences. So you're using the sky gray base as sort of a very thin separation between those parts, and then the rest of it you're going to want to paint with this color. And again, it's pretty transparent, so don't forget to build it up a few times just so that you can get the most sort of value out of the color. And then I'm going to finish off highlighting those areas with the pure white, still using the number 0 brush. And just again building the white up gradually over several layers so we get some different sort of levels of intensity on the model. I do want to point out I made one little mistake. I initially, here you can see I painted the strap on the rifle white. It's not really, as far as I can tell, I think it's not really supposed to be white stripe. It's actually supposed to be a leather strap. And I'll actually go back towards the end of the video and correct that and paint it brown, though I won't do it on camera. But you can kind of basically ignore what I'm doing with that here. But it's easy to make a mistake to make because actually quite a lot of gun straps from this period were white, and I'm not excluding the possibility that some Russian units may have used a white strap on their guns as well. With those white straps done, I can move on to painting the black areas of the model since they're sort of a layer up. And that kind of includes things like his hat, his boots, and his gaiters, and also his cartridge case and backpack, which on sort of the Russian units is going to all be kind of blacks and grays. So here I'm just base coating everything with black. I'm still working with the number 0 brush because I've got a lot of fine detail and a lot of sort of already painted areas adjoining where I'm working, and I want that to kind of make it easier to control the paint and not get it in areas where I don't want it. For my first highlight on all the black kind of gray areas, I'm going to go with my old sort of standby favorite color here, which is a German gray, and I'm just applying it pretty generously on all of those areas. It's a pretty saturated color, so you won't need to build it up very much. One layer should do it. And you know, the only place I'm really leaving the black alone is really in really deep shadows, or in sort of a way to sort of make as a divide between sort of separate, distinct sculpting sort of on the model within those black areas. I'm then going to go ahead and take the German gray, and I'm going to lighten it slightly using deck tan. I'm using deck tan because, you know, I mean, white, of course, would work, or another light gray shade, but since I've already got that sort of deck tan tone in the coat, I like to work it in other places just so you get more of a consistency. So that's why I'm using it as the lightening color on my black. And my first sort of highlight layer on these areas is going to be pretty subtle. I'm not going to put too much of it in to start, just a small amount, and sort of start building it up on his, you know, boots, particularly his putties and his backpack and all the other areas on his hat, you know, just very sort of carefully sort of trying to define separate areas and sort of any sort of edges particularly. You want to keep this kind of subtle and, you know, not make too many areas too light gray. I'm going to apply several different highlight areas with progressive amounts of the deck tan added. When it comes to things like the gaiters and the hat particularly, I'm going to be careful not to let the grays get too light or bright because I want those to feel a little bit darker and not really get any sort of shininess going. But on the boots and on the backpack and the cartridge case, you can kind of make it look like you've got some shininess on the surface or along the edges particularly. So I'm mixing some lighter grays there and sort of running them very carefully as sort of edge highlights or just sort of shine kind of things. You can do a little bit of that on the hat too, especially the bill if you're really, really careful. And you may even want to finish off with just a few dots of just almost, not pure deck tan, but very, very light gray here and there, just to really make it look like it's shiny. I should mention that I went ahead and make black gaiters on this guy, but you'll sometimes see these Russians with white gaiters or just all white kind of pants covering over their boots. The black is partially a strategic choice here that you can make, which is helpful particularly if you're going to be painting a big unit of these guys, because the more white you have to paint, basically, the more time consuming it's going to be, because white is just a slower, more difficult color to paint, and blacks and grays you can paint pretty quickly and efficiently. So, you know, if you're looking to save time and you've got a lot of these kind of guys to work on, I would really recommend, you know, choosing sort of the black gaiters if you can, because it's going to make everything a whole lot kind of easier. And, you know, you can always mix in a few with the white kind of pans as well for variation, but if you keep them in the minority, it'll be a real time saver. And so now I'm going to be revisiting white on this model for the third and final time. I'm primarily focused here on some strapping on his backpack and his canteen, and also all that braiding and trim hanging off of his hat. If I'd done this earlier, it would have really gotten in the way of painting the backpack and hat, so I wanted to finish those first. Just like before, I'm just base coating those areas to start off with the sky gray, and I'm using my little number 0 brush just to make it a lot easier. Now, again, I'm going in with my 50-50 sky gray and white to apply a secondary layer over top of those areas I just painted. Most of the straps that we're dealing with now are really small and really fine, so it would probably be okay to just skip directly to white at this point, just as a time saver, but I like to have that just extra layer in between, just for a little bit of added sort of subtlety and variation in the tone. And now I'm finishing off with the white. The good news is, because we're working again with the really fine, thin areas, it's much easier to focus the white and get it much more intense right on the first coat, so you're not going to need nearly so many layers. Especially on the braiding, I really like to put it extra bright sort of along the top edges of the braids, just to sort of simulate a lot of extra light hitting there and a little bit of a shiny effect. Quite honestly. There's also a lot of detail and molding and sculpting on those braids, little sort of twists and knots and stuff, so it's really, really helpful here to have the small brush if you want to get a nice, delicate finish. Now I'm going to be going in and doing some red details. I've got some Vallejo black red here, and I'm going to be painting his epaulettes, his collar, a little pom-pom right on the front of his hat, and then there's a little red band sort of wrapped around a tassel hanging from his sword handle. This red and its placement is going to vary based on the unit you're painting and also the period of the uniform, so pay some attention first before you start doing this. I'm now going to highlight those red areas first with a couple layers of a Citadel Mephiston red, and then followed with several more brighter layers of Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet. And I'm just going to kind of be building those on and getting a sort of a nice bright look. And these are pretty small detail areas, so I don't feel like I need to really spend a lot of time detailing the red. You can do this pretty quickly. And again, you really do need to check the uniform to figure out which areas here you want to be red. Things like, I think the epaulettes are almost always red on the later uniforms, but things like the collar might not be, and that pom-pom in the front also might not be. There's a lot of little things you basically need to check. And you might even see coats with red cuffs on them. I did not do the cuffs on this particular coat in red, but it is another possible variant that you can go ahead and do if you want. I'm now going to start working on the scabbards of his sort of bayonet case and sword, and also on the base of the gun. I'm just base coating the scabbards and sort of also the grip on his sword using German camouflage black brown. Pretty straightforward. And then on his the stock of his rifle, I've grabbed, or musket I guess, I've grabbed some chocolate brown, and I'm going to use that as a base coat there. I'm going to also use the chocolate brown to apply a first highlight to those leather areas that I just painted. Now I'm going to continue highlighting all the brown areas, and I'm working kind of simultaneously. I'm going to work the leather areas further up by first taking a bit of brown sand and mixing it into the chocolate brown and applying that as sort of more of a highlight on the leather areas. And then I'm going to finish the leather with just some pure brown sand, really thinly applied, sort of as an edge highlight, and sort of building it sort of from the edges, I guess, inward, basically. So you get lighter sort of outer areas, and it's a little bit darker towards the centers, basically. As for the gun, what I'm going to do is my first highlight there is mix some khaki into my chocolate brown and layer that onto the wood. And then I'm going to go over it with another layer of just pure khaki, keeping it really thin, because we don't want the whole gun to look super khaki like he's coated or anything, but just kind of being very subtle there. And if you want, you can even take some of the brown sand or some other colors there and sort of mix that in here and there just to get a little bit more variation in your wood color. At the start of this, you'll probably notice right away that I have now adjusted the strap color on the gun as I said I would. I changed it from white to leather, as it should be. And what I'm doing now is I'm painting the brass sort of hardware on this particular figure, and there's quite a bit of it on this model. There's like a metal applique on his cartridge case, on the front of his hat. There's quite a few assorted belt buckles. Sort of the hardware on his sword is going to be that. Some hardware on his gun. There's really a lot of it. I'm just base coating it here with a mixture of German camouflage black brown and just a bit of Vallejo Air Gold in there. Here again, working with my number 0 brush, just so that I have really good control and I can really paint these really little areas really well. I then went ahead and just took pure Vallejo Air Gold and just sort of went back over and really quickly highlighted all these places, which is really mostly a question of just applying very thin dots of color. You can make it brighter with some silver highlights over top too if you wanted to, but I kind of liked it a little dull here, and I didn't really see the need to make it much brighter. And now for the steel metal areas, I took some German gray here and I mixed some Vallejo Air gunmetal into it to make a nice dark metallic base coat. And I'm applying that here to the barrel of the gun and to the bayonet and all of that, just kind of getting a good coat on. And I'm also going to base coat that canteen on his back that way because it's appeared to be kind of metal. Then to highlight, I'm just going to mix in some more gunmetal into my base and sort of build that up. You can do as many layers as you feel necessary here. I usually do sort of one extra layer with a brighter gray gunmetal mix, just so I get a little bit extra subtlety, which is especially nice on the gun, which you want a little bit darker. And then I'm going to just finish off with some pure gunmetal, which again on the gun I'm going to apply lighter, a little bit heavier on the bayonet, and then also quite a bit heavier on the canteen because that can be shinier. If you want, you can also grab some steel, for example, if you want to really put some shine on the blade of the bayonet or on the canteen, but I didn't really choose to do that. I like this little bit more subtle, darker, more worn look myself. The final thing left to paint is that sort of tuft or plume on his hat. I'm base coating it here with black, and then I'm going to highlight it very subtly because it's sort of supposed to look black, but I want to get a little bit of color in there. So I'm going to take some Vallejo black green here, and I'm going to mix it into my black. I'm going to be really applying that as a highlight. I'm really especially going to focus it towards the top of the plume and make sure it's a bit darker at the base. I'm going to add a little bit, just a touch of white in there too, to create a very dark black, green, gray color. And I'm going to highlight it a little further there. And again, really focusing that slightly lighter shade towards the top and letting it kind of be darker down towards the bottom. I'm really going to finish off the plume now by applying a wash of Citadel Nuln oil and then some Coelia green shade, which I'm mostly going to put towards the top of the plume. And okay, here is the finished Napoleonic Russian Grenadier. This actually went really quick, didn't it? It feels like I hardly got to even finish talking about everything. But yeah, it's not a very difficult model at all if you have just this greatcoat on. And you may see this and say, wow, it actually looks quite a bit like a lot of the French soldiers, and that's no coincidence. A lot of the uniforms from this period really are quite similar, and in some ways that's nice because once you've painted a few different forces, you'll start to see commonalities, and you'll start to pick up tricks and sort of develop techniques that will really work on others. So a lot of what I did on this model would be equally useful on a French soldier, or a Prussian soldier, a German soldier, maybe even English soldiers, some of it. So there's just this vocabulary that you'll find helps you when you're really doing anything. And I'm sorry I didn't get to cover some of the more sort of features that you see on Russian uniform. The coat underneath is typically green, and of course we didn't really get to address that. I only referred to it really very subtly in the fact that I put a slight green cast into his plume, and that's because I wanted to have something that referenced the green of the Russian uniform, even if just a teeny tiny amount. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video, you found it useful. If you did, please like it, share it with your friends, leave me comments with what you thought. Of course, that's always appreciated. And subscribe to my channel, of course, also if you have not gotten a chance to do that yet. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time.